Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Justin Desjardins. I'm one of the account executives here at Revelwood, and I'm joined by my colleague Haley Elliott, who is going to be showing you an overview demo of adaptive planning here in a few minutes. I see a few more people are coming in. Welcome and thank you for being here. I do just want to take a few minutes to give you an idea of what to expect on today's webinar. So firstly, some background on us here at Revelwood. You might be wondering who we are and how we come into play. So we are a platinum business partner of Workday. And what that means is that we're part of a select group of partners that help you evaluate and implement adaptive planning. And so a couple of quick notes on today's webinar. We should be finished in about 45 minutes. During that time, every one of you will be on mute. But if you have a question, there is a Q&A button down at the bottom. So please feel free to enter any questions there, and we will try to get to you. And if we don't, we will make sure to get back to you via email. I'm aware that some of you may be here because you have an active initiative to get into a cloud FP&A software solution. And some of you may just be here to learn, or you're curious. Either way, we would greatly appreciate you taking 15 minutes with us in the next few days just to have a quick chat and see what your current challenges are, if you have any feedback for us, and whether there are resources that we can follow up with. An important thing to know is that the demo today is meant to just really give you a glimpse into what adaptive planning can do, but this certainly won't cover everything, as adaptive planning is a really powerful solution. So I only have a few slides before I pass it to Haley, but adaptive planning is a place where you can do your modeling, reporting, and analytics all in one place. So everything that you need is in one solution, and it will act as your central source of truth, if you will. And typically, we're talking with finance teams, and of course, we're pulling in the general ledger data, but adaptive can connect to really any data source that you need, because at the end of the day, data is data. And you'll be able to bring all of that data into one place to model and report on that data with confidence. So this slide gives you an idea of some of the areas of the business that you can model and plan using adaptive. It's extremely flexible, as it's not limited to the core FP&A. You can model out really any operational area of the business that you want with adaptive. Now, adaptive planning runs on what's called the elastic hypercube technology, which is a patented Workday technology, and this is a key competitive differentiator. I'm not going to talk about the technical specifics because that's, of course, not important right now. But the reason this is key is that it makes the solution scalable and able to have an unlimited number of dimensions, versions, scenarios, etc. And when your system needs more processing power, the system is intelligent and expands only when you need it. But what's equally important is that you have this power without losing ease of use and maintainability. And as you will see in the demo today, everything is extremely intuitive, with being just drag and drop functionality, so that the actual end users can own this system themselves without assistance from an IT resource or an outside consulting resource. And so that's really why Adaptive has leaped ahead of the rest of the market in the FP&A space. And Adaptive has over 6,000 customers now globally in all industries. And you can see a number of logos here on this slide. And so finally, before I pass it to Haley to actually dive into the system, you can see some of the highlights here, both on the adaptive planning product as well as Workday as a company. Workday is a $5+ billion company, so certainly not a new kid on the block. They've been ranked #1 on Fortune's Future 50 list, #2 on Forbes' World's Most Innovative Companies list. And one of the main reasons that Adaptive is able to have 6,000+ customers globally is because the planning product has a 97% customer retention rate, which is a really high retention rate. And once again, that comes back to the ease of use. So hopefully you can see that ease of use. And with that, I will pass it to Haley to dive in.
Perfect. Thank you for the info, Justin. Hello, everyone. My name is Haley Elliott. As Justin mentioned, I'm a pre-sales solutions consultant here at Revelwood. I've been working with Adaptive for about 2 years now, and spent about the first year of that actually implementing the solution, which means while I'm not going to go into a ton of deep technical detail, specific use cases today, if something you see today piques your interest and you want to talk about a specific business case or use case, please feel free to reach out, and we can definitely chat. But with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into the demo. I do always like to level set with just an agenda so you know what's coming up. Like Justin also mentioned, feel free to pop questions into the Q&A, and I'll do my best to get to them as I can. So our game plan for today, we are going to start with just the basics of Adaptive. How do we navigate? What's the actual structure that we build on? Just so you can hopefully see that from the very base of the system, it is quite easy to use, maintain, and navigate. Then we'll move into scenario analysis with active dashboards, how to build them, and you'll see that everything in Adaptive is drag and drop. There is no coding. Then we'll take a look at financial statements. While we do normally build out a full 3 financial statement model, so your balance sheet, cash flow, and P&L, for the purposes of today, we'll just be looking at your P&L or income statement. For modeling, we're going to focus on workforce planning, although like Justin also said, you can really model any use case that you're looking to, from finance models to S&OP, something like that. And then we'll wrap up on some additional reporting. So those in browser for your more ad hoc reporting, and then Office Connect to hopefully make some of your board reporting and those types of decks easier. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into the system. So hopefully you can all see my home screen in Adaptive now. The reason I say my home screen is that you can customize what end users see when they sign into the system. So right now, I just want to see a snapshot of the company. How are we doing with revenue, tracking towards our targets, that kind of thing. But maybe you want someone to immediately see a report or company announcements. Hey, everyone, your budget's due on Friday. 2 core components of what we call the foundational data model, and that's really a fancy way to say the backbone of Adaptive, what we build on, are going to be the levels and versions. So we'll start in levels. Levels are going to be your organizational structure. So if you're project-based, you might put projects in here. Most companies, though, will choose to do business units, locations, departments, kind of whatever the base of your planning structure is, your legal entities, that kind of thing. This is also going to be the first line of security in Adaptive. So typically what you'll do is assign department heads or budget owners to their specific levels or departments. And then every single dashboard, model, report, really anything they look at in the system will already be filtered to that level. When they open up this dropdown, they will also only see the level. So in this case, Sales North, in this dropdown instead of the entire hierarchy. And so that's important for you to know for 2 reasons. One is just security. So I have 0 risk of going into Sales South or another department and erasing data or seeing data that I should not be seeing. And also ease of maintenance. So I'm not having to maintain 20 different dashboards, 20 different workbooks of the same exact model. That's all managed through the level structure. The other piece here, like I mentioned, is versions. So versions are unlimited and adaptive. You can have as many as you want. Some of my clients will choose to do like 20, 30 versions of their monthly forecast. So if that's something that you like to do, you can absolutely do that. And there is you can load in an unlimited amount of data as well. So one thing you will notice is this little lock icon in the bottom right-hand corner of some of these versions. That just means that this is a locked version. And so end users can't make changes to the data in it, but they can still report off of it, view it. And that's really just an additional layer of security for your board approved budgets and that kind of thing. Cool. So those are kind of the 2 main components here. So with that, we're going to dive a little bit into what we're actually looking at on the screen here with active dashboards. So we call these active dashboards for a couple of reasons. One is that anytime you see a number in Adaptive, you can always drill into where that number is coming from. So for instance, for net revenue, if I click on that, I'm going to get two different options for how I want to drill into this data. The first is going to be this little nice explore data up here, and that's going to open up a cell explorer that you'll see me open a couple of times today. And so this gives you a lot of information if there's a calculation driving it, and we'll talk about formulas in a little bit, specific locations, levels, dimensions, anything like that. But the one that's probably most interesting here is just the audit trail. So you can always click on an audit trail to see what users have made changes to that data, what change they made, when they made it. So it's a really great way to kind of check who's been in the system making changes. If you see a strange number, be able to trace that back to an individual and ask them directly about the variance if there isn't a comment. You can also pull a system-wide audit trail report to see all of the changes that have been made throughout the entire system. That's a pretty good way to kind of keep track of those more minute details of your budget. The other option that we saw is the drill down path of our dimensions in the system. So what's unique about Adaptive here is that anytime you add a dimension, which is just a nice little plus button in the back end, as soon as you save that, it appears here in the drop down to drill into. So the reason I say that's unique is with most other softwares, you actually have to code these drill down paths in. So if you do not know MDX and you want to kind of change up how you're drilling down, it's not going to be possible. But in Adaptive, like I mentioned, you can kind of mix and match how you'd like to drill down at any point in your use of Adaptive. So in this case, for instance, I want to see revenue by my customers, perhaps. And then maybe I want to know what products specifically those customers are purchasing. So this is a really good way, very simple example of starting to drill into your revenue numbers. But the idea is if you're in a meeting or something like that, where someone's like, okay, but where is that actually coming from? You're not having to go back and hunt through 6 different workbooks. You just have access to all of this data in one consolidated view. The other reason these are called active is because you can actually bring your planning models directly onto the dashboards. So for instance, again, we're going to put on the Sales North Manager hat. Once I do that, we're going to see this sheet open up so I can make some changes. So for some just on the fly scenario analysis, if I want to go ahead and say, what happens if we beat our sales targets by 15%? I'm going to make that change, save it, and what we're going to immediately see is all of these little dots on each of these charts, just showing that they're all refreshing based on that change. So it's a very active way to do your scenario analysis, to be able to bring those different sheets directly onto your dashboards. One of the last points we'll talk about here is just going to be creating snapshots. So most of the time your execs will ask for some sort of view like this. They have specific KPIs and metrics they're interested in. So what you can do is actually just set up an automatic schedule to have this entire dashboard or a segment of this dashboard sent directly to an individual or a group of individuals on really whatever frequency is most useful for them. So kind of automating that process. The very last piece on dashboards is just the question we always get, how are these actually built? So if I come into the back end of dashboards and just come into that company summary, what we are going to see is, like I mentioned, everything that we look at is drag and drop. So if I edit, you'll see a bunch of different chart options over here. So literally all you have to do is drag it on. And then you have access to every single data point that's been loaded into Adaptive. So this is financial data, operational data, sales metrics. Adaptive looks at data the same. It does not care about your data type. As long as you have that data somewhere, we can bring it in and create visuals off of it. Beautiful. So that's kind of the high-level overview of dashboards. One other thing I'll mention is that you can view these in different time strata. Right now, we have this set all the way to days, but you can automatically change it to months, quarters, years, kind of whatever is most useful for you to look at. The next place I want to go before we start getting into the financial statements is just quickly reviewing navigation. So the reason I like to take us through navigation is just to prove the point that your entire planning, reporting, and analytics process is right here in one navigation pane. And the reason I call that out is it's because it's going to save you the trouble of signing into 6 different tools to kind of be able to get all of these different pieces of your planning process. You have one login to access all of these elements. Your sheets, where we're going to go next, are your planning models, your working screens where calculations are happening, you're inputting data, anything like that. Obviously, there are a lot of sheets here because it's a demo instance, but our team will meet with you for a requirements gathering session to figure out exactly what you need to be configured here. Your assumptions are going to be your core drivers, so sales drivers, workforce planning drivers, anything that you want to be able to change in one location, and it'll update everywhere it's referenced in the system. So instead of having to Control F for everywhere you hard-coded something or hunt through formulas, again, just make a change to the assumption in one of these sheets, and it will update everywhere it's referenced. We will come back to reports and dashboards. We're also not going to cover consolidations today, but accounting consolidations and eliminations are available in Adaptive. We do also have a process tracker and workflow to help guide end users through the system. But where I quickly wanted to kind of pause was through integration. So kind of an integration nerd, but I will try not to go into too much technical detail here. But basically the idea is that Adaptive is data agnostic. So we can connect to quite literally any system, whether it's an older on-prem system or a brand new cloud system. We can connect to it and bring over whatever data you're looking for on an automated cadence. So you can set these tasks to automatically update your actuals on a nightly basis, an hourly basis, really however often is most useful for you. You can also, of course, just generate templates to import data. The very last piece before we jump into our financial statements and modeling is going to be support. So this, as Justin mentioned, is truly meant to be owned by the entire finance team without needing to rely on any sort of IT support. So what you'll see here is just a bunch of different options to figure out what are other customers doing with Adaptive, submit technical requests directly to Workday, or there's this nice little question mark at the top of every single page. That's a context-dependent knowledge base. And what I mean by that is that Adaptive is actually guessing what you need help on based on where you are in the system. As you can see here, I'm on dashboards. It's guessing I need some articles on how to build a dashboard. Beautiful. So let's go ahead and jump into some sheets then. And again, just as a reminder, I will be, if I say sheets or models, all of that means the same exact thing where we're entering data and having calculations run. So let's go ahead and jump into the P&L. So a couple of things you're going to notice when I pull this up. One is the green numbers and the black numbers. Green numbers are your actuals data, typically coming from your ERP. Black numbers are your plan data, either just entered in or based off of those other models that we saw in that sheets drop down. Adaptive, like I said, tries to make this as easy as possible, so that is also coordinated with your version icons. What I'm going to go ahead and do is navigate down to our lower level. So again, jumping down to Sales North so that we can see some of the functionality of how this might be used. So here you'll notice a couple of these have blue carrots and red carrots in the corners. Blue carrots just mean this is a calculated field. So formulas and Adaptive are pretty straightforward. Again, no coding. So that's going to make it pretty easy for finance to pick up. And they're much more informative than that B2 times C6 in another workbook that you don't actually have access to. We can see here that this is literally taking the FTE account from our personnel model and multiplying it by one of those assumptions that I discussed earlier. You also have a nice little comment left for you here and a formula assistant should you or a budget owner decide, hey, I actually want to put a formula on here real quick, then you are able to just use that formula assistant. The red caret means there is a note or a comment. And so you just right click and have the option to add a note. And when I pull a report later, we'll actually see all of those notes aggregate on the bottom of the report. So you do not have to hunt through every single screen to see all of the comments your end users are using. One of the last points we'll look at here is just some of the financial intelligence available in Adaptive. So in this case, let's say for new hire training, we're actually going to reduce new hires a little bit this year. Probably won't need as high of a budget, so I'm just going to reduce this down to 20K. I'm going to enter that in for the financial year, hit enter, and we'll see a couple of breakback methods pull up. So one of the most popular ones to use, just because everyone relies to some degree on seasonality, is going to be this proportionally using prior year values. So Adaptive is actually looking at the previous year's actuals to figure out how to break back that financial year budget. And you can see those numbers here in blue. You'll also see a couple of trend lines on the side. That's completely optional on an end user by end user basis, just in display options. So you can see a bunch of different options here where you can truly customize this to end users. As I make changes to what time I'm looking at or version comparison, it will not affect anyone else who's currently in this model. The last piece that I'll mention here before we kind of start drilling down into where these numbers are coming from is going to be just that as soon as you save a change, it aggregates all the way through the level structure. So you don't have to run a batch process or kick anyone out of the system to see the most up-to-date numbers at every level of the hierarchy. One other piece that I didn't mention actually on levels while I'm here on our P&L is that this is also where multi-currency is handled. So for instance, if I'm on Canada, I can be viewing this P&L in Canadian dollars. And then as soon as I roll up to operations, everything will be exchanged into USD. So Adaptive will handle that exchange of currencies pretty seamlessly for you. So what we'll go ahead and do now is just drill down into our salary and wages. So let's say I want to know where salaries are coming from. I'm going to go ahead and right click and explore cell, kind of what we saw earlier. And what this is going to do is open up a pretty familiar screen. And we're going to use this to get into our workforce planning model. So one thing I'll call out here, just for security purposes, is there is a salary detail permissions checkbox in the back end where you can deselect that for specific users, and they will not see this line item detail. So as some of you may know, Workday was originally an HCM company, human capital management. So they are quite strict about personnel security. And so that carries over to Adaptive as well. So if you don't have that permission, you will not see line item detail. You will only see this top level number. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and drill through to the model. So I could have also gotten here through our navigation menu, just through sheets. But for now, I came here through the P&L. So coming from our outputs directly to our inputs. So this is called a model sheet. Modeled sheets are very dynamic. You can drag on any columns that are most valuable for you to see on the back end. So as I'm showing some of these models, just keep in mind that everything is configurable to the end user. A couple of points here. You'll notice some of these are drop downs. These are referring back to those assumption sheets that I mentioned earlier. So in this case for taxes, as soon as I set someone to a New York tax, then they will be pulling that value from the assumption sheet. One other piece here is going to be allocations. So this is just one way that Adaptive can handle allocations. So basically what we're seeing here is I'm splitting Will across two different departments, and Adaptive will allocate his expenses accordingly on the income statement. So right now, these are just manually keyed in, but we could also have them calculated based on hours from your time tracking system, or really as detailed as you would like. These are going to be, so all of the calculations are going to be happening in the back end. If I come in, right click, row details, you'll see a bunch of calculations happening. Again, just keep in mind that this is all configurable to end users, but the one I always like to call out is right here. So you'll notice that as of June, this individual, Madeline, hits her maps for one of our taxes. And that tax will actually pick back up at the beginning of the next fiscal year. While I'm here, also we're referring to January as the beginning of our fiscal year, but Adaptive, you can customize the calendars if you're on a non-standard fiscal year. So no problems there. But the point here is, again, financial intelligence. Adaptive is really here to help make your planning process more granular without you having to add any additional manual effort. Okay, last piece here is just you can enter data directly onto these sheets. So if you don't want to use the manual import function, or someone's just in here planning for an open head, I can just put an open rec and go ahead and fill in all of these fields. You can also copy a previous row if you're just trying to replicate a bunch of different open heads. Really a bunch of flexibility depending on how your end users are most comfortable using these different sheets. And as soon as I add any of those, they will also immediately reflect on our forecast in the P&L. Okay, so I know that was a really quick overview of models. This is where I would highly encourage y'all to reach out if there are specific ones, especially around revenue that you'd like to see. We can do some pretty cool stuff on that side of the house, but for now, I'm just going to stop here and move on to our reporting and visualization functionality outside of dashboards. So to get there, I'm going to come to our navigation menu, come into reports, and open up a couple of our reports. Just to show you the back end, this will look pretty similar to the back end of dashboards. Again, that consistency of interface, so you're not having the steep learning curve, but you do have a variety of options for sharing, editing, permissions, if you just want someone to be able to view a report but not edit it. The main point is security is flexible and adaptive. This type of report is going to be primarily used for your ad hoc analysis. So as you're doing your budget, your reforecast, your budget versus actuals, this is where you will kind of pull that report quite quickly. And I'll show you the back end of this report in a moment, but let's chat about functionality first. So if you remember back to that little red caret I pointed out on the P&L, all of those notes are now here on the footnotes. I have them as footnotes just because that's how I prefer to format it. But you could also have these as inline on the side of the report and a column on the side, really however is most comfortable for you. You'll also notice for any of you who work in multi-currency again, that I'm currently viewing this report in USD, but I do have a filter to be able to immediately exchange that into any other currency that I would like to view. So I'm now looking at that same expense report in Canadian dollars. You do have the ability to download these reports as PDF or Excel to distribute them if you don't just want to create the dashboard snapshots and want something more like this. And again, you retain that same ability to drill down. So for instance, if I see here, we have kind of a wild variance in our other T&E, I'm going to go ahead and click into our actuals and drill all the way through to our transactions. So this is a really cool feature, especially if we have anyone from accounting on the call, but finance as well. If you just want to see where that variance is coming from without having to go back into your ERP, we can just go ahead and open this transactions report. Common question is whether you can add additional columns here. Yes, you can. We commonly see things like vendor, really any class or dimension that you might have in your ERP, invoice numbers, anything along those lines. But just for here, we can see that there's a very high journal entry here that for a company lunch that we may not have expected. Beautiful. So the last piece here before I take you into the back end and then into Office Connect is going to be the ability to pivot this entire report. So again, if I click on any of these accounts, I can pivot this entire report by any dimension in the system. And so this same thing that I mentioned on the dashboard applies here. And that is just going to any dimension you add in the system with that little plus button in the back end will automatically be added to this drop down. So in this case, let's say I want to look at salary and wages by function instead. This is an attribute that I've created and just tagged my different levels with. And so now I'm seeing all of those salary and wages by S&M, R&D, G&A, and my different costs of sales without having to create another net new report. So I'm going to return to my undrilled report. One other thing to note, you can change formatting as much as you'd like. But just to show you how that would work, I'm going to come into edit. And so this interface should look pretty similar to what we saw in the back end of the dashboards. Everything is drag and drop. So you have all of these elements from the accounts in Adaptive. Again, does not care what data types you're trying to bring onto a report. So if I wanted to bring something like FTE onto this report, which is more of a non-financial metric, you can absolutely do that. Adaptive isn't going to tell you, sorry, that's sitting in another cube and I can't reference that. You can see here we have year to date, and that's also just a nice little thing, or a nice little element that you can pull from the time elements. So quite literally click and drag. And then, like I said, you can run these as Excel and PDF as well. Beautiful. On to the last thing we're going to look at today. That's going to be our Office Connect. So Office Connect is Adaptive's plugin into the entire Microsoft Office 365 suite. And it basically connects your Excel board report decks, your PowerPoint decks, anything that you're usually sending to execs on a monthly or quarterly basis, and that takes you hours to days to build. It connects all of that to Adaptive so that it shrinks that time down to a couple minutes. So if I go ahead and highlight linked cells, our blue cells are going to be data linked directly to Adaptive. Green cells are dynamic labels. So when I refresh this to March, so when I'm having to do my March report, we'll actually see all of those labels update. You still retain the ability to explore cell. So if I click that, it's going to go ahead and take me back into Adaptive to figure out where that data is coming from. So even from the Excel report, I can still drill back in. One note there is that this does always ask you to log into your Office Connect credentials. So you still are going to maintain those level of security permissions so that people cannot circumvent them just by coming into Office Connect. You'll notice that this looks pretty similar to the back end of our web reporting interface. So for instance, let's say I want to fill in some of these accounts. All I'm going to do is open up my GL accounts, grab a couple of lines, drag them onto the report. And what we're going to see is that these cells highlight blue, which means they're now connected to Adaptive. Now, let's say I need to prep the board deck for next month instead of February. I'm looking for March. What I'm going to do is come up into Workbook Properties, roll my report date forward by 1 month, and refresh the report. So you'll see just two things happened. All of these numbers are now populated, and all of our labels have now updated to March. So I'm now pulling through my March actuals, my working budget, and my actuals from the previous year as well. You do still maintain full Excel functionality. So if you have any trend lines or graphs that you really like to use, you can always include those here. And one of the last points I'll make as well is that if you like to create this type of report for different subsidiaries or different departments, something like that, you can always come into repeating reports. And instead of having to spend hours or days doing that as well, just come into levels and select whatever entities you're looking to replicate this type of report for, create. And at the bottom, we're going to see 3 tabs are created, a formatted P&L for the UK, Canada, the United States, and then we still have our formatted P&L. Very last point, if you add a new GL account in your ERP and Adaptive, That will also automatically sync with any of these Office Connect reports. So for instance, if I add a 6140, then you will be able to refresh this report and just see that line appear underneath the 6130 line. So that idea of really maintaining data integrity and adaptive as a single source of truth. So you're not leaving out important information when you're updating your data, your reports, all of that. And as I mentioned, this does apply to your entire Microsoft 365 suite. So if you have a PowerPoint deck, something along those lines, you can also refresh. I do see we have one question. Why are vendor contracts still black in prior months? That refers to the P&L. So if I come back to that P&L, we'll notice that one of the lines in what was originally the actuals period was still black in our sales north right here. That's just a special setting we have just for demo purposes to show that if there is an account that you just want forecast data showing for some reason, you do have flexibility in which periods are showing actuals and which periods are solely driven off of numbers that you've inputted into the forecast and then moved into the actuals. So that's only happening for that one line because we have that special account setting in the back end. Cool. So that's everything from me. And yeah, I'll pass it back to Justin.
Okay, thank you, Haley. Hopefully that gave everybody a good idea of the power of Workday Adaptive Planning. Once again, that was just a glimpse and an overview demo. I'm sure you can see just the beginning of the power of how it can take your team out of low-value tasks and into more strategic value-added tasks. We do encourage you to learn more about Revelwood, our implementation approach. You can visit our website at revelwood.com. We also encourage you to visit our Knowledge Center when you're there. We do offer tips and tricks about all aspects of the planning process, technical tips on the tool, planning tips for your budgeting process, various other tips on other business aspects when it comes to your FP&A model. And so thank you all once again for attending. We did have a great audience today. We do appreciate it. And once again, either myself or one of my colleagues will be reaching out for a 15-minute follow-up call to get some feedback from you. Hopefully you will take the time to share your feedback with us. We greatly appreciate it. We look forward to helping you further and talk to you very soon.